Surveillance company Clearview AI became known for scraping billions of images off of social media for its facial recognition application that it sold to many companies and law enforcement agencies. Yet Clearview does more than just search faces. It also compiles links to social media platforms, allowing police a deep look into individuals' lives. This talk will focus on Clearview AI's facial recognition technology and the ensuing fallout. We present Freddy Martinez with Clearview AI, the Shady company tracking your face online.
Hi, everyone. My name is Freddy Martinez, and I am a policy analyst at Open the Government. I am so excited to be in your living rooms today as part of Hope 2020 to tell you a story about the worst surveillance company I've ever heard of. It's a company called Clearview AI, and I kind of really wanted to tell a story, a backstory about how we found out that they exist, and really uncovered a lot of malfeasance, to put it that way. So just a bit about myself. So I'm a policy analyst at Open the Government, which is a nonpartisan coalition of partners based in the Washington, D.C. area. We work on all issues of transparency and openness. And before that time, I was a technologist in Chicago primarily. I was doing, Linux engineering and other kinds of technical work, but I really got interested in the idea of police surveillance, how it's being carried out around the country, and started doing Freedom of Information Act requests, FOIAs, to really uncover more. So one of the projects that I worked on when I was in Illinois was this very important law called BIPA. It's the name of the biometrics privacy law. And as part of a number of groups, we successfully defended it at the Illinois Supreme Court. So it kind of became a natural fit that when I joined Open the Government, I would take over some of our work on facial recognition technologies in general. And feel free to follow us on social media. Okay, so just a bit about facial recognition for completeness. There was a report in 2016 that found something like half of all of Americans are in a facial recognition database. Most of that information comes from licensing photos. So if you have a driver's license, there's a very good chance that the FBI has your photo in its facial recognition database. Something like 400 million images. This technology is being bought and sold in secret, and particularly troubling because the way that it functions is that it creates sort of a biometric identifier of your face. We'll turn it into a number of mathematical features and look for those features in something like a DMV record or mugshot data. But this technology is very inaccurate. The National Institute of Standards and Technology studied it and found that some facial recognition algorithms are 100 times less likely to be accurate on Black and brown faces than on white faces. So there's a strong demographic bias, and knowing what we know about police bias and already, you can imagine that adding this as a tool to an already biased system will make things worse. And these kind of concerns are not just theoretical. Earlier this year, just last month, we heard about cases where people were being wrongfully arrested by Detroit Police Department because of what they just trusted the facial recognition system, and people are getting falsely arrested for it. So it's not a great position to be in. Just a little bit about Open the Government. One of the things that I've been working on as part of our groups is just sort of letting Congress know what are the issues that they should be aware of, how should you be thinking about facial recognition, regulating it, what are the safeguards, what are regulations that wouldn't work. So there's this very real skills gap between like technologists like that might be listening to this talk and public policy folks. So I would just say that definitely my investigations were very well informed by my previous work, and a lot of public policy places don't have this kind of experience. So I highly encourage people to, get involved if this is the kind of work you want to be doing. So one of the first things that I did when I joined up in the government was I wrote a sort of FOIA 101 for people who want to investigate facial recognition in their own backyards. So if you've never sent a public records request, you don't know anything about facial recognition, or maybe you know half of one and not the other half, this is a great guide for you all to read. It really explains your rights. And so we put this out there, and at the same time we launched a project. We launched this project with a group called Muck, which is a platform, sort of a software as a service platform that lets you send FOIAs, and it will do things like automatically follow up with agencies when they inevitably blow you off. So we sent about 100 FOIAs and really wanted to check, what's the current state of affairs in summer of 2019 with facial recognition technology, who's got it, what's changed. And, we started getting back some documents and analyzing them. And through this project is how we kind of came to know about Clearview. Okay, so the first major hint that something is wrong was sort of Atlanta police. They were dodging our requests. I would email them routinely and ask, hey, where are my records? They stonewalled us for a while, and then they eventually got us a set of records. But it really took, months of sort of chasing them down. And the reason that matters is because, if we hadn't done our due diligence, if we hadn't exercised our rights, we maybe would have missed this story. So that is to say that public records laws are, in your favor. We as the public have a right to these documents. We have a right to know what our government is up to, and we should really strongly protect our rights and use them. So, Atlanta police. The first kind of major hint that something was wrong was this document we got back. It was an email, and I've never heard of Clearview. This is a pricing sheet dated 2019, and they said that they spoke to a representative, and it cost $2,000 a year per license. Based on previous reporting, a facial recognition system costs in between like $70,000 to $140,000 a year. So, that was kind of interesting. Maybe like a small yellow flag. It's a little bit hard to see here, but they claim to have this proprietary database, and they claim that police officers can do unlimited searches on their platform, which is a little bit strange. And so those are two kind of yellow flags immediately that maybe prompted us to take a closer look at the documents that we were getting back. So a cheap tool, never heard of them, and unlimited searches, that was kind of weird. But really what we hit on was this white paper, this legal analysis that was included in the FOIA response. And it took us a while to wrap our brains around it. We actually had to read the document like 3 or 4 times to really get a sense of what's actually at play here. And let me show you kind of how that looked. So it's not often that you get something that's called attorney work product. It's just supposed to be privileged and confidential, and they sent it to us. Don't worry about the text. We'll highlight some of the key findings, the stuff that really jumped out at us. So at the very top, Kirkland & Ellis is a huge law firm in the US, I think the largest one in the country. And their client is Clearview. Here in the center with the signature is this person named Paul Clement. He was Solicitor General under George Bush. So the fact that he signed this document was very interesting. Imagine that a police department gives you something that they worked out with James Comey's signature or something like that. So very high-ranking former government officials really, working with Clearview, this previously unheard of company. The date's August 2019, so this is hot off the presses. And the document is the legal implication of Clearview. And I just want to pause for a second and just think about this for a little bit longer. Paul Clement is not a nobody. He is probably like a partner at a law firm. And what this entire memo tells us, just off of the letterhead, is that this document is very expensive. So Clearview probably spent $200,000 to $400,000 just to get Paul Clement's, review, the signature, and that's even before we start looking at what the document actually says. So pretty important stuff. Again, took me a few readings to catch it. Clearview claims that they're taking photos of someone, uploading it to an application of some kind, and they're matching it to what's called publicly available images. We talked again earlier about DMV photos or mugshot photos were usually what drives these databases. So that was, a bit weird. And at the bottom here, they claim that they don't have to follow any state biometrics or privacy laws. They don't have to follow the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. And, I fought that case at the Illinois Supreme Court with a bunch of our friends. The fact that they could just claim that they don't have to follow the Supreme Court ruling, which came down in January or February of 2018, is very strange. So again, all of these things are kind of red flags almost immediately. And they go on to describe the images themselves. So Clearview was collecting images off of social media sites. They called them, networking sites. They said one employee networking site, which we eventually found out was LinkedIn. And they claim that they're collecting these publicly available images and putting it in their database, which includes what they call billions of publicly available images. What's worse is that the way that they would do their facial recognition is they would say, here's a face of Freddy. Here's a Facebook profile that we think looks just like him. And they would link out to that profile or, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, what have you. And so putting it all together, just to reiterate, Clearview is collecting billions of images, of your data, your faces, collecting it off of social media and selling access to law enforcement. They claim not to have to follow any kind of privacy laws, selling this data for profit, and the linking of images out to other websites is extremely problematic. So what they're doing is not just like, hey, here's 2 images that looks like this person's face. But, with a person's Facebook, you can imagine that what their social network looks like. With a LinkedIn, you probably know an employer. With web logs, you can maybe read personal writing or of some kind. You can imagine religious affiliations, all sorts of really revealing information that it just collects arbitrarily and is selling to law enforcement. So in a lot of ways, I think there's this thing that people want to call it a facial recognition company, but it's really not that. It's actually, the information they're collecting is actually much more revealing than my face. So this is very troubling. This is not a facial recognition vendor, it's a mass surveillance company. So other things that are important to point out is that there's no meaningful consent in opting in or opting out of the data. So, I post a photo of my kid on Facebook and they can just claim to capture it because it's publicly available. There's also no meaningful way to remove your photos from their data sets. So later Clearview would claim that if they already collected your photo, too bad. That's it. That's not how consent works. That's not how we should be thinking about protecting our information. And then another thing that's really important is that by the very nature of how social networks work, you have to upload some amount of personal information. So Facebook has like a real ID, a real name policy. Most social media sites require some kind of image or information about, you. So by their very nature, even if your Facebook is private, you're still actually giving out a lot of information, which, people can harvest. It's really bad. And so putting it all together, it took me a while to figure this out, is that what we're talking about is like not really like one violation of privacy, but like a whole number of them. There's like 5 or 6 that we can think of. And so I got pretty troubled by this, and I did have to pause and say, is this really what I think it is? So I wasn't sure if this was really anything. So, I had to dig a little bit deeper. No one at this point had heard of this company. And so we want to know, who are they? So the first thing I did was I cataloged all of the emails that I had, email addresses that I had, every mailing address that I had. I took all the names that I could run through, and I was checking out their website. It looked just like any sort of Silicon Valley startup, with a button that just said request access. I tried it, didn't work. And that's about it. So very sort of secretive. So I did what anyone else would do, is I started using open source intelligence techniques to find everything that I could about this company. If you've never read Michael Bazel's excellent book on OSINT, highly recommend it. And I was able to find that the company was about 18 months old at the time, first registered their website in May of 2018. We were able to find that through passive DNS. And I started digging around some of these names. So for example, one woman, her name was Jessica Meridos Garrison, fairly unique name. And I would Google for this, and there was a woman who was helping reelect the Republican Attorney General of Alabama going by this name, very unique name, and was also speaking at panels on casino security and why casinos should be using facial recognition technology. No company name, no professional affiliation. And that didn't strike me as really, didn't make any sense. Like, why is this Republican Party operative pitching facial recognition technology to law enforcement? And we found addresses, a lot of addresses. This company kept moving their business addresses, which, I'm sure every single company that is on the up and up practices this thing where they have a new headquarters every 3 months. So I called in some friends. I called Dave Moss at the EFF, and I asked him if he had ever heard of Clearview. He said no. He did a bit of digging, gave me a few leads about some other police departments that I could FOIA. I talked to other experts on facial recognition. No one had heard of this company. So something weird's going on. So we have to do more FOIAs to figure out what's really happening here, which we did. And we began to find some small hints. In particular, Florida has these incredibly well-suited public records laws. So they gave us a ton of records. And in particular, there was this thing called CrimeDex that they claim to be using. So this might not be obvious to you, but someone steals something at a Target. Target will send the alert to police departments and say, hey, do you know this person? Are they a routine shoplifter? And so they have all these networks of sharing information, one of which was called CrimeDex. And so these police departments all over the country are emailing each other about, here's a bounced check, Here's a trespasser that I found on a Ring doorbell camera. Here's a, you know, something stolen from a Target. Who are these people? And they would email back, the police department in Florida would email back like, I think it's this person's Instagram. I think it's this person's Facebook. So that was happening in CrimeDex. And then also in CrimeDex, all of the emails would end with, try out Clearview, free trials. So that was interesting. And then we had heard through, you know, reading other documentation that Clearview claimed to have 200 police departments as clients, but everyone that we would ask for their contracts would tell us that they didn't have any. So there's like no paper trail, which again, legitimate businesses do not do this. So that was interesting. And another thing that we found is we found these emails back and forward. At one point, a police department in Springfield, Illinois, asked, you know, when you're filling out arrest reports, do you mention Clearview? And the guy from Florida just writes back, oh no, just keep it really vague. So that raises really serious Fourth Amendment concerns, obviously. You know, they're keeping this information away from suspects, in their own words. Okay, so some hints that this thing is very shady, but this is about where I hit my dead end. I have to switch strategies at this point. And so that's what we do. We reach out to the New York Times, Kashmir Hill, at, you know, what they call the failing New York Times. She's an incredible tech reporter, and we gave her all of the research and we said, hey, we think there's a lot here. Are you interested? You know, what are the next steps? And she was, and she did an incredible job reporting this. She was able to track down, you know, addresses of the company, like where they actually existed. I love this map of New York City. You know, for those of us who have been to previous hopes, you know this section of Manhattan, and it's not far from the New York Times building. And so I found this address and I said, hey, I think this address is, you know, Suite 100. Will you go check it out and see if, is this company legit? And so later I hear from Kashmir, she's like, well, no, that office doesn't exist. And I'm like, wait, it's a 5-minute walk from the New York Times. What do you mean it doesn't exist? You like checked it out on your lunch break or something? And she says, well, no, it's not that the address doesn't exist. Not that just the office doesn't exist, but the building itself doesn't exist. There is no address at where you claim it is. So again, really shady stuff. And, you know, they would later claim it's just like common paperwork errors. So there was a lot of digging to find out who was actually Clearview. The venture capitalist firm that first funded them was, you know, Peter Thiel's funding. So this was going on for a while, a lot of investigating, but it was still very hard to find people who actually worked at Clearview. Eventually, Kashmir was able to track down the CEO of Clearview, a person by the name of Hoen Thon Tat, which we'll get to a little bit later. And so, you know, did a lot of this reporting. They wrote their story and they published it. And it was kind of an important story. It was, so if you want to hear a little bit more about like the background investigations into like peeling back, you know, the VC firms and the missing addresses, there are 2 articles that you can view. The podcast on the right is really interesting. You know, Kashmir talks about riding the train for an hour, and I think she's 7 or 8 months pregnant at the time, trying to get anyone and everyone to talk to her. Pretty interesting story. If you're interested, check that out. So they do all this investigating, and then they go and they publish. And it actually is a fairly big story. It's the front page of the New York Times on the Sunday edition. It's like right up there with Trump's impeachment. And they really do talk about how this application could be the end of privacy. So yeah, because what Clearview could do is you could take a photo of someone that you see walking down the street. Maybe you think they're cute, and then it'll pull up an Instagram page. It's pretty creepy stuff. They were able to confirm many of our findings. 3 billion people in this facial recognition database. The company claimed to have 600 police agencies using them. And a lot of what we thought was weird was actually confirmed. Clearview would be sending everyone and anyone a free trial just as a way of getting business. So you could just go to their website, register, and just be using this application without any kind of without anyone knowing if you were law enforcement. This is a picture of Juan Tantat from his publicly available social media profile. Other things that they found were that Clearview was spying on Kashmir. So she would go to a police agency and say, I want to test out your application. And they would run searches on her. And at one point, Clearview contacted the police department and said, hey, are you talking to the press? Seeming to indicate that they could see the searches that law enforcement was doing, which is really creepy and bizarre, and kind of pretty bad information security, and that there were police agencies of all sizes using Clearview. So confirming a lot of what we had sort of previously thought. The fallout to this story was, pretty immediate and a little bit mind-blowing. So as it happens, immediately, about 2 days later, Clearview got hacked. That's what happens when you make the internet angry. So they get their client list taken. People are able to find their application in insecure Amazon S3 buckets. That is to say, people expected this. But there's other kinds of fallout. Tech companies immediately send cease and desist to Clearview, Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft, and they tell them to cut it out. You're taking our user data against our terms of service. And Clearview kind of responded, well, it's our First Amendment right to take the data off of social media, which is a very interesting constitutional interpretation that I've never seen before. And in particular, BuzzFeed News creates an entire series of stories around Clearview. And I highly recommend people check this series out, because Clearview responded with a, well, all publicity is good publicity sort of PR campaign. And what BuzzFeed's reporters found was that almost everything that Clearview was saying was a lie. So they would claim, we only sell to law enforcement agencies in the US. And bottom left, you're finding Macy's and the NBA using this application. They would claim that they were only selling in the US, and there was evidence that they were pitching to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. At one point, the founder was asked if he would sell the application to governments where it was, for example, illegal to be gay. And he said, we'll think about it. And their marketing material was very, very shoddy. They claimed to have solved a terrorism case within seconds. BuzzFeed disproved that. That is to say that, they would just go out there and lie. And it was really this kind of journalism that uncovered a lot of problems with what they're doing and what they're saying. So incredible series if you're interested. Other things happened. Senators got involved, congressional investigations. So for example, there's a child privacy law, a federal privacy law. If you're under the age of 13, you can't create a social media. So because of this law. And Clearview was claiming that they were ingesting 50 million images a day into their data set. And so how do you make sure that like you keep children out of it? How do you make sure that you keep graphic content out of it, or maybe potentially illegal content? So Congress got involved and really started asking a ton of questions. The New Jersey Attorney General barred all police departments from using it. And Clearview got sued 4 times, in fact, different kinds of class action lawsuits. And in particular, the one that ACLU did is, again, a violation under BIPA. So in BIPA, if someone takes your biometrics without your consent, you can sue them for up to $5,000. There are 6 million people in the state of Illinois, times however many number of biometric violations there are. So you can imagine that these kinds of lawsuits can really impact the financial future of Clearview. So that was the fallout. Really interesting stuff to see. And John Oliver did a section on Clearview. Check that out. The link is below. So a few lessons learned. Recognize when you need additional resources. I got stuck a few times. I just had to say, hey, I can't do this investigation anymore. Kashmir, are you interested? Here's everything that I have. I spent a lot of time following up on my FOIA requests. So I actually called the police chief and I asked him, like, where's the contract for using Clearview? And he told me, like, no. The salesperson just called me and asked if I wanted a free trial, and they said yes, and I have it, and that's why there's no money exchanged. Again, kind of unheard of. Document everything. I had so many false leads and little nuggets that I thought were interesting, that maybe didn't make it into the story, but are really interesting details. Document that somewhere. And then just finally, public engagement matters. Having a background like I did really helped. Being technical really helped. So it's important not just to be technical, but be able to talk to policymakers, read like that legal memo by Paul Clement and things like that. So just important to be multidisciplinary wherever possible. If you're interested in surveillance in your backyard, my experience has been that you often find surveillance in the place that you least expect it. I found this company selling cameras that you would stick in a gravestone, you stick it in a gravestone and stick it in a cemetery. Presumably there's a lot of crime in cemeteries. And like, it's very weird. Like, I didn't expect these kinds of documents when I was searching facial recognition in general, but that's what happens all the time. So if you're gonna do surveillance in your backyard, I highly encourage you to think outside of the box about where that could be. And then finally, another note about surveillance is that many police chiefs didn't even know that their department was using Clearview because their own officers just kind of gained access without any oversight. So we know the issues of police surveillance and the fact that many cities don't have oversight in their own city on police. But we also know that even the detective bureau, for example, doesn't know that this investigator is doing all of these other things. So often we would have this thing where you would call a city and ask them for comment. They would say, no, we would never use Clearview. And then, 2 hours later would say, we're not using that product anymore, clarifying that they were using it. So really raises troubling questions about transparency and oversight. Just a few minor things. Transparency really does matter. Shameless plug, that's the name of our newsletter. So anytime that you think that you might need to talk to someone about what's happening, there are organizations there are people who really do want to tell your side of the story. Congress can always access information, even if it's classified, if you want to blow the whistle on something. Or advocacy organizations, and there are also technical tools like Secure Drop Signal for contacting journalists and the like. Just a few minor resources. The Citizen Guide that I mentioned earlier, The EFF has this incredible atlas of surveillance where they sort of looked everywhere in the country about where they could find police surveillance. So you can go in, to their platform, type your city, and then you'll see that maybe your city is using facial recognition and license plate readers and other kinds of tools. So it's an incredible resource. Muck is a fantastic resource for anyone who's doing public records. They do so much, and there's so much on their website. If you don't know where to get started, just click around and search on there. And there's a ton of articles, tons of research. So I highly recommend Muck as well. And then just also myself as a resource, info@openthegovernment.org. And I guess finally, before we close, this research is not just me by myself. I had a ton of people in civil society, researchers, journalists, contributing. So maybe I hit the tip of the iceberg, but really these are the people who helped uncover everything. So too many to name, but just to say that no one person can do this kind of reporting or kind of research. And so, I'll be eternally grateful for all of these people who really do care quite a bit about these issues. And with that, I think we'll take questions.
Welcome back to Clearview AI, the Shady company tracking your face online. We are here with Freddy Martinez. Freddy, thank you so much. We've got some great chat going on in Matrix Q&A. If you have questions for Freddy, please feel free to drop them in the live stream on our Matrix chat. But we are, okay, Freddy, question for the audience. Clearview got sued, but what came out of it? What is the current state of the company?
That's actually a really great question. So there's a few different lawsuits. A few of them are class action lawsuits. And with those lawsuits, they go through a certification that the class has standing and things like that. The ACLU lawsuit in particular is slightly different. And that's sort of just going through the proceedings. These lawsuits were filed in, I think, April. And then, of course, because of COVID, everything has slowed down. And so we don't actually know, it's hard to predict what the financial impact of those lawsuits will be. But if you kind of do the numbers on Clearview, their revenue streams are not great, so, they're probably making about $1 million a year just on revenue. So and because they're a private company, it's hard to tell how much venture capital they actually got. So yeah, it's hard to say how that will play out, but that's just to say that there's at least 4 lawsuits, and they're still sort of making their way through courts, and they're very much in the preliminary states. So we'll see kind of how that plays out in the next few months. And now as courts are opening up, you'll see those lawsuits moving. So, hopefully we'll have an update on that in the next couple of months.
Thank you. Okay, next audience question. The technology is impressive and it was misused. Can you talk about better legitimate uses for what Clearview has developed?
Our experience has been that when regulators, people in power, whoever it is, actually take a look at sort of the trade-offs, the civil liberties, privacy trade-offs to public safety, they find that it's really inappropriate, even for what they're trying to do. So for example, the Attorney General, the case in New Jersey, they had claimed that Clearview had claimed that the Attorney General, they had helped a police department in New Jersey with some, I think a child sexual exploitation case. And when the Attorney General found out that this was being used as marketing material, they took such exception to what Clearview was doing and that they were using, the Attorney General as marketing, that they shut down the entire state's use. So I think on balance, in terms of what we're talking about, sort of the potential to completely lose anonymity in public space versus some potential, fringe public safety benefit, that when you have that informed debate, it's impossible to say that, yes, this is a thing that we really want to do as a society. So that's why oversight and transparency is so important, to have that informed debate. And so my belief is just that when we've seen those debates play out, everything has been like, this is too much power. We don't want police to have this ability. And we would rather just them not use it. So my experience has been that there's almost like no legitimate use for it. And that's just based on sort of what we've seen from other people providing oversight.
Thank you. Okay, next question from the participants. Hope has had 2 talks about Amazon Ring. There's an obvious so-called business opportunity for Ring combined with Clearview Technologies, or maybe another company will do this. What do you think?
So I did mention this very briefly. At least in Florida, we were actually seeing, like, the police chief, they found some Ring camera where they thought someone was like stalking around the neighborhood. I think it was like someone got too close to a truck and they thought that was suspicious. And they were actually trying to use Clearview on this camera footage. And it didn't work. So I think, obviously we have all of, like, as we always talk about with surveillance, like, not only are these technologies extremely invasive, but they don't even work. And so on balance, I think what we're going to see is that, as we've seen, like, regulators and people providing oversight and transparency, or, taking a look and trying to do some accountability, they're also coming to the same conclusions. But that's a great question. And actually, I think, I didn't mention it I mentioned it very briefly in the talk, but we are actually seeing that kind of like mass surveillance and Ring, with the social media monitoring and the cameras type thing.
Okay, we have another one. Is there a risk that Clearview will just change their name or become a different company to hide? Could this be a way of dodging the lawsuit and further accountability?
Yeah, corporations always have all sorts of fun, creative ways of dodging accountability. What we've seen really is that my experience has been that they actually are really leaning into all of the press that they're getting, and I think that they're actually trying to use that to drum up business. So I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't know that will happen. It maybe will, but what we've seen so far is that they actually are trying to use this to drum up their own business. So I don't think that will happen, just because I think they've got the glossy green eyes, that they see money in the controversy. So I don't think that'll happen.
Okay, next. Do the lawsuits emphasize how racially biased Clearview is, i.e. for misidentifying people of color?
So that's a great question, and actually the answer is no, and the reason being that Clearview, I didn't talk about this during the talk, but they claimed in their marketing materials that it was 100% accurate. And the way that they did that is they kind of basically ran these images that they had against their application, and then they had a panel that they got together to certify the results of the audit. The panel included a retired federal judge who was I think 75 or 78 years old, who's head of the panel. Another guy I think was went to college with the founder. So their marketing material is really shady, and they claim to just be 100% accurate and no racial bias. And in fact, that they claim that their technology actually, because it's done by algorithms, actually has no racial bias in it, because computers don't see color or race. And that was in the marketing memo from the legal memo that I talked about. So they claim that there's no bias at all. In fact, it's 100% accurate because computers did it. And the guy I went to college with said so. He signed off on our audit. So really shady stuff, as I mentioned.
Sort of dovetailing with that, we are several months into ongoing Black Lives Matter protests. Are there indications that Clearview or something like it are being used to identify protesters?
At least that's a great question. I've been asked that question a lot of times. I haven't seen any indication of that. Mostly what you see is like social media pro posts being collected by people like, the FBI or fusion centers or local police departments. We haven't seen any evidence of that. Mostly what it is just people collecting random tweets and Facebook posts and trying to make sense of that in real time. So we haven't seen any evidence of that, but it's definitely a concern as well, especially like sort of trying to go back and identify particular protesters. So that is a concern, obviously.
Next question. As surveillance continues to expand, what are best practices for waking up people in your community? Are there any tactics that scale at street level to continue to convince neighbors to not buy Ring, to question their police departments, to push back?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think obviously doing this transparency in your own backyard is hugely important. Like I'm not from Atlanta. I didn't expect that Atlanta would be the tip of the iceberg. So I do think that's really important in doing this in your own backyard. I do think there are places where people can push. For example, I've seen Portland has a ban on facial recognition by commercial entities, which is one of the strongest privacy laws in the country that's been passed recently. I think it's going to take a variety of these tactics, obviously working in your own community, talking to your neighbors, but also trying to provide oversight, transparency, but then also like thinking about how do you like either ban or put a moratorium on this technology. So it's going to have to take a variety of tactics, but I think oversight is going to be sort of a central aspect to it. It's going to be hard just to be like convince my neighbor to care about that, and that's going to scale up. I think it's going to require all sorts of political pressures. But I'm happy to talk about that in the chat as well.
Fantastic. One last question. Some attendees are reminded of the movie Minority Report. Do you think some dystopian future scenarios have been accelerated by Clearview and technology like it? And can you comment on whether such scenarios are more likely?
Oh man, dystopian movies. That's a good question. I saw the RoboCop one, which I thought was good. I mean, I think really the risk of like actually losing anonymity in public, the fact that like a police department can instantly identify you with any kind of interaction with you is really horrifying. Yeah, and I did see that. I mean, I did see Minority Report, and it was very similar systems. I don't know about a particular movie that comes to mind, but I did see like Senator Wyden tweeted that it was like a Black Mirror episode, which I thought was very strange. So I would just say that I do actually see like quite a bit of a dystopian future here actually happen. Well, when we first got into Clearview, we realized that this kind of line of like the loss of anonymity in public, we had always thought that was a dystopian future like 5 or 10 years from now. And when we found these records, we were realizing that like that future is actually collapsing very, very quickly. And that's one of the reasons that we put a lot of energy into this this project, because we really thought that was a few years off. And we were like, oh crap, it's already here today. So yeah, I would say that like dystopian futures are a little bit weird to think about, but I would say that like the future is not that far off. It's actually probably a lot closer to the present. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Oh, that's great. One last question, which is actually the last question. What's next for you? What are you looking into?
I mean, I think one of the things we really need to talk about is, how to regulate this use, how to talk to congressional staff, inform them about what's happening. There are a lot of important fights right now, sort of like, reauthorization of FISA and Section 215. So we haven't launched any new investigations. We're actually still kind of, we like working on other sort of continuing to gather documentation. But, I think maybe in the future we'll launch another sort of surveillance in your backyard project and see where we get from there. So yeah, I'm a big advocate of looking for surveillance in your own backyard. That's how I got started, and that was hugely impactful for this work.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Freddy Martinez. This has been Clearview AI, the shady company tracking your face online. Freddy, thank you very much, and we
Thanks
are
for
going to
having
throw
me.
it. We're going to throw it back to ground control. Thank you so much.
It's such a gift of that the work that you did and so many other people did help to expose.
If you wanted to be involved with this, you could get in touch with Plan C, and they would teach you how medication abortion works, how the dosing works, and how to be a good source of information for people in your community and to dispel misinformation about medication. Women on Waves is an organization that is dealing with the hostile abortion climate around the globe by getting abortion pills to people anywhere they are. They have done this in all kinds of ways, either having boats in international waters where people could come out and therefore they would not be subject to any kind of laws. They had abortion drones that would fly overhead and drop medication down to people. And one of my favorites is they did an abortion robot.
And hello, hackers. My name's Fred. Some of you may know me, others might not. I've been doing artwork for the Hackers on Planet Earth conferences since the Fifth Hope was the first one. I worked on the last one too, the Circle of Hope. And I put together a little graphic for you this year for the 2020 conference. Now, you saw the graphic already, but what you didn't see is I've put a few Easter eggs. We're going to update the site with this new interactive version of the image. If you click on the buttons right here, you'll see that you can change the letters and the numbers. And if you do the right combination, you'll see that a few Easter eggs will pop up. Now, I hope that keeps you busy for a few minutes. And if you like it, if you enjoy it, let me know. And I'll let you get back to the conference. Have a good one. See you next year.
Good afternoon. It is a real pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Flavio Aggio. Given the worldwide health crisis, Flavio has one of the toughest and most critical roles in cybersecurity today, Chief Information Security Officer of the World Health Organization. True to hope form, Flavio and I met this past March when my law firm detected a state-sponsored and ultimately unsuccessful attack on the WHO. Since then, we've become friends and colleagues, and through this friendship, I've learned that Flavio really puts the W into WHO. He's a citizen of Brazil, Italy, and the United States with a background in physics, information technology, and cybersecurity. Flavio has done some truly amazing work with the manufacturing and semiconductor industries, as well as international organizations, and held posts in the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Brazil. And oh yeah, he was also the CTO of the city of San Francisco. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Flavio Aggio.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction, Alex, and hopefully we'll continue to update each other on the journey of cybersecurity. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to all of you, and we'll be able to have questions and answers towards the end. And hopefully
hey, what's up, nerds? Somebody in here should give me streaming rights into here, and I'll stream you my stream deck of a Hope Conference as I live mix it. You gotta give me streaming rights though.
Nice. How do we do that? Let's see.
Well, no, I can do that, but you still. Well, actually, so if I wanted to camera, it's the same rights. Screen share and video share are the same rights. I am part of Red Team Village, so technically you just put that on there. I need that role anyway. We're currently doing these. We're currently doing the CISO of the WHO. Yeah.
So you tell me when I should start.
Flavio, you are live. Please proceed.
All right. So yeah. So as I said, thank you very much for the opportunity. We're going to have questions towards the end. I don't want to go too tight to the presentation that I prepared for this conference, but I'd like to share a couple of things with you. The first one and the most important one is what WHO works worldwide to promote health, to keep the world safe, and to serve the vulnerable. Those are the three pillars that we work for, and very proud to work for this organization. And the idea here is to really share the COVID-19 cybersecurity attacks and what technologies related to protect, detect, respond, recover, very extremely important, but not sufficient. You know, when we had multiple attacks in different times was a little bit different, but the number of attacks that we started to receive when COVID-19 was declared a pandemic increased dramatically. And what gave me a very clear notion that technology by itself cannot really be sufficient. So we need to think about human OS upgrade, because what I mean is IT people, security people, and users need to think differently. The way that we rely on technology 100% is the wrong way, and the way that users may rely 100% on IT is wrong as well. We need to reach a balance, and it is not only about training, awareness, because in my experience with multiple departments in WHO, with the public, what I see is the lack of understanding in how technology works and how online world works. So it came to me that we need to really change the behavior of the users online and change the behaviors of the IT community. And we must openly acknowledge systems vulnerabilities. In another way, what I'm trying to say is humans are the weakest and the strongest links in cybersecurity. What I mean by that is when you use a system, the user is the first line of defense. And if the user doesn't understand the implication of those actions, is very difficult to defend an organization or a system. But on the other hand, users, IT produces software, and software is really written by humans. Therefore, they have intrinsic vulnerabilities. So that's the reason I see as the strongest links and the weakest links, and we need to really change that. And coincidentally, I like the term human OS. I was not the one that created. I don't know who created that term. I heard in a training, and based on my background, humanos in Portuguese, as an example, is written in the same way. So the human operating system. So if you put lowercase o and s, it is precisely human in plural in Portuguese language and Spanish as well. So it's interesting to think in that way, because we need to really not look at only from the technology side and not look at only on the training and awareness when we are talking about cybersecurity. So this is the important component for my presentation. So I try to show to you what are the important parts from the technology side and important parts from the human side. And the human side impacts the users and also the IT community. So in trying to stress that, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we had a 5-fold increase in cyber attacks. It was like a flood, incredible flood. And if we didn't have 9 key important components of the integrated cybersecurity program, we would be in trouble. So I'm listing here all the things that I believe that were essential, especially during the pandemic. The notion of identity management, the privileged access management, very important. More important is the multi-factor authentication. So when Alex was describing in the introduction, unsuccessful attempts was only unsuccessful because we precisely had multi-factor authentication for our system. So quite important. Another one is password management solution for IT professionals and users. So I'm gonna pause here and tell you a story. During the COVID-19 pandemic declaration, and right after, we detected that APTs were not only trying to target WTO users in the WTO environment, but also on their personal environment, in the social media, in accounts elsewhere, with the hope that they could load code or trying to find ways to do a parallel jump, and in teaching the users password management and enabling multi-factor authentication in their personal lives is quite important. So I'm going to go back to the slide and continue with the other items. This one is an important one that we started last year with a business case quite important to enable an integrated SOC, Security Operations Center, with the SIM, the Security Information and Event Management, vulnerability management, including patch management, threat intelligence. Think internal and external. If we don't do that, quite difficult. And antivirus is something from the past. You need to have endpoint detection and response for any device. desktops, laptops, servers, phones, smartphones, and tablets. And global proxy for any device. So when a user goes to a conference, to a hotel, home, doesn't matter where, at least the manageability of the access to the internet is controlled, and the endpoint detection is established, and all that integrated with the SOC. And by doing that, you'll be able to really quickly detect and quickly respond to attacks. I'm going to go back to the slide. Another thing that was quite important, when we started to see COVID-19 in the media, and WHO started to really make the announcements, we saw a huge increase of email impersonations. So just for you to have an idea, from all the internet email that was being sent, 70% was impersonation. And we needed to fight that with technology, and we implemented in 30 days DMARC, domain-based message authentication reporting conformance, and we dropped all those 70% impersonations. So this was quite important for us, and I ask you, IT professional, hacker, ethical hacker, government entity, companies, let's all together implement DMARC in all email systems, and perhaps make DMARC required in order for email to work. And with that, we can eliminate the email impersonation that we suffered quite a lot. People impersonating at WHO.int, and it was very difficult for the receiver to distinguish. So with DMARC on, again, we implemented in 30 days, we dropped a lot of emails that shouldn't be even generated. So I ask for your help, and I have multiple people working with me to really put that campaign. Let's make DMARC mandatory. So back to the slide, email advanced threat protection. Most of the attacks that we observed, 90% or plus, they are related to links and attachments. So I urge you to think about solutions. There are several in the market. Do your research. We are doing ours to implement safe links and attachments. And by doing that, we will be able to really avoid a lot of attacks. And the last two to complete the 9 recommendations is remote access via a browser. Make sure that we drop all the clients, avoid all the clients to do remote access. The browser base is way better. And the last one is legacy, but still necessary. VPN and firewalls, very important, but we are moving away from that because we are adopting a zero trust strategy. The idea is there is no perimeter. Perimeter goes to the endpoint. So with that is the technology aspect, and I didn't include everything. I included only the key ones. So the next slide, it is related to the technology is not enough. We need to upgrade the human OS. So when working for WHO, we realized that we needed to dedicate a lot of time in the cybersecurity awareness program. So we had multiple trainings, online training, briefings, questions and answers, and regular phishing exercise. What I mean by regular? So we adopted the monthly phishing exercise, and we had a percentage of users, let's say 4,000 users per quarter, that we randomly selected, and we sent phishing exercise to their mailbox. And for the users that clicked on the link, we repeated. We generated another phishing exercise for the next month. And then the ones that clicked it twice, on the third month, we sent it another one. And for those that clicked it 3 times, we had a one-on-one conversation to understand how can we help them to understand what is needed and what they can help us to improve our awareness program. And with that, we improved a lot the understanding from our users and how to inspect, how to not fall for those phishing. Important is to have a policy, overall policy to handle cybersecurity from all aspects and make that policy available and really communicate to the entire organization. And the third component is a very important integrated risk management. So risk can be seen as not only a cyber risk, but a risk to the organization, and how to connect that into the governance of the risk for the organization. So integrating that risk management from the cybersecurity side to the organization, very important. So understanding how those 3 bullets really play along with IT professionals and users is one way to really upgrade the human OS. But not only that, we need to do way more to improve our defenses. And how I put together 7 recommendations and how you can do that in your organization. And the important component is to really manage the risk by changing the behavior from IT professionals and users. So you have to work on both sides. Implement and maintaining a cybersecurity awareness program that I mentioned before, quite important. One thing that we started to do and makes a huge difference is to build a red and a blue team. The red team is creating all the checks, and the blue team the balances that are needed. We are in the beginning in that journey. The red team is being formed and makes a huge difference, especially during the pandemic. And I recommend all organizations to think about the creation and start with the red team, and the blue team will be born, because that creates the checks and balances necessary. The fourth item is to recognize and mitigate IT products and processes vulnerabilities. So we need to really identify the risk owner and understand that IT products will always be, and processes as well, we're going to have vulnerabilities. How many times you're being requested to upgrade software every time? And how many times attacks happen because software is not up to date? Many. So we need to recognize that and bake that into IT professionals and users. The logical continuation is to promote and perform software updates continuously. In order to fight, you need to enable rapid response. So when an attack happens, how can users communicate in a faster way, and technology can communicate in a faster way so we can really respond. And the last one is an important one, and I don't want to stress who the CISO reports to. I just wanted to make sure everybody recognizes, and we need to address the potential conflict of interest. IT wants to do things, wants to enable the organization to make more money, to be more efficient, to do this or that. And cybersecurity wants to really protect the organization, manage to a risk level. So creating that balance is important, and make sure that we recognize a potential conflict of interest is the first element to upgrade the human OS. Continue with the denial that cybersecurity and IT, there are no conflicts, will not help anyone. So there's a conflict, because if you want it to be 100% secure, one, it's impossible. And if you want it to be absolutely efficient without security, that's not possible either. So the balance needs to exist. The last part is I wanted to really help people, and this is what I do in WHO. And the best way to help people is to help the individual and their family. Because if they are better protected, and if they do that at home, they're going to do that at work. So the first is we promote the use of long and unique passwords for every services. So we recommend passphrase and a unique password for each system, so personal or work. The normal question we receive from users is, how can I memorize so many passwords? So we promote the use of Password Vault. With that, the user can generate a very good long password, unique password, and we give suggestions that you can see on the slide. And the third element is to really make sure everybody uses dual-factor authentication. Sometimes it is being called two-step verification. Always use hard or soft token, and we give suggestions when soft token is used. So Google or Microsoft Authenticator and your smartphone. So those are the three basic tips that we give to our employees and to help themselves and their families. So just to wrap it up, as I said, technology is not enough to protect anyone in a normal state or when we have a pandemic situation. We have to really get together to change the behavior. And it is not only about training. It's also, of course, training awareness are a component, but we need to recognize those points that I mentioned before and work with the IT community as I'm doing now. And we have to really communicate in an open way and acknowledge systems vulnerabilities. Again, humans are the weakest and strongest links in cybersecurity, and we are the ones that responsible for code that are running in our lives, but also we are responsible to make sure that users understand and they can make their decisions in the best way so we can be protected. So with that, I'd like to really open for questions. As I said, I don't want to be as a lecture way. I reserve more time for the questions and answers. So Alex?
Excellent. Thank you so much for this, Flavio. I think it's very insightful to hear your thoughts as to what's happening inside the World Health Organization during quite possibly its craziest point in time ever in the history of the World Health Organization. And with you at the helm of it, I think it's it's in good hands, I have to say. I had a question. There's quite a few questions from the audience, and I'm so glad that you left a good chunk of time here because I think we'll be able to get to quite a few of them. So please for everybody in Matrix chat. Please keep them coming. I think we'll have a lot to talk about here with Flavio, and this is a very rare opportunity. My question to you that, and I'll only ask one because you and I talk and we can always talk offline, but I'm sure others are interested as well. You mentioned DMARC, the importance of DMARC and third parties impersonating the World Health Organization during this health crisis with the coronavirus. Obviously, that's super critical to prevent from the World Health Organization. But with respect to attacks on the WHO, you mentioned there's been a significant uptick all around. Are you seeing more attacks in one area or as opposed to another?
Basically, what we are seeing is we see a continuation of attacks using sophisticated phishing. Multiple APTs doing that, and we see attacks related to application vulnerabilities more and more. So vulnerabilities that we don't know, so 0 day, we saw that happening, but some vulnerabilities that we didn't have the time because the organization is quite large to really address. And that's the reason I mentioned about the red team formation. So we can have external organizations doing penetration testing, and internally also we can really assess the level of weaknesses from the application layer. So, but again, most of the attacks, what we are seeing, it comes from tentatives from phishing, and some of those are quite sophisticated. One that I can stress that it's very important to use safe links and attachments, as I mentioned in my presentation, is a bit.ly shortened URL that is quite tough to educate users. So we need a bit of technology to prevent those, because when the URL is not that clear, and if you have a user that is quite in a hurry, that can happen. So this is what I see.
That's fascinating, and probably a bit of a wake-up call for application developers too, if you think about it like that. I mean, application security has always been important, and I think even more so for an organization like the WHO, and especially when a good chunk of the workforce is probably at home. So very, very difficult to manage all of those endpoints, all of the updates, all of the patching. I completely get it. Staying on the same subject matter as DMARC and email authentication, we have a question from the audience. Actually, it's several questions from the audience in the form of one question. And the first one is, how is availability affected by adoption of DMARC for such a large organization as the WHO? Second one would be, do you consider availability problems as their own security risk? And the third, if we can keep this all in our heads, were you rejecting DMARC failures from the beginning, or did you take a graduated approach? So I think the long and the short of that is summing it all up is, what was the business impact of implementing DMARC?
Fascinating question. So, so let me expand a little bit on the DMARC implementation so you understand. When we decided to explore DMARC, we needed to really understand what was being used and what applications was were coming from. And we had a good list that we knew off the bat, and we started implementing one by one the DMARC, the DNS configuration. So this was something that we did, but we kind of got lucky in one way, because we wanted to implement DMARC for a long time, but we never had the right time, the right opportunity. And when the number of email increased dramatically, that was the right time and the opportunity. So we work with the communications department of WHO, and WHO needed to send multiple newsletters to journalists globally. And they were having problems in doing that because of the number of impersonations. Our at W2.int was at risk to be considered as malicious. So what we have done, working with the communication department, is to create a subdomain. And this is what I recommend to everyone in terms of implementation of DMARC. Why is that? Because by creating that subdomain, we're able to separate completely the high number of emails, and we enable the policy in 3 stages. 1 week to be only documentation, so P0. The second week, 50%. So 50%. So the first week was I'm accelerating. So let me go back. The first week was only to acquire the information. The second week was to configure it as quarantine. So messages will be quarantined in their target destination based on the policy. And the third week was we configured to be reject 50%, and the fourth week reject 100%. So by doing that, we created a level of control and investigation, and we could accelerate for that new subdomain because didn't exist, and we will not interfere with the @w2.int. So we could compress those 4 weeks in 2, basically, and we enable that. Then we continue to work on each application to enable the DMARC configuration, and we had most of the applications configured in about 2 weeks, and we created a 2-stage approach because as we configure it, we put the reporting and the quarantine almost immediately, and so we did in the second week the 50% reject, and the last week on the fourth week, beginning of May, we put 100% reject. So that was very good. Most of systems were okay. Unfortunately, because we couldn't find owners of 2 or 3 systems, we took the because we didn't have an option. We had problems, availability problems for those systems, and we worked later on to enable DMARC for those minor systems. But everybody understood why, and everybody was glad that impersonation was controlled in a 30-day period. So I really recommend to do in stages. Maybe 30 days is too aggressive, but you could do that in 2 months or within 2 months. And I really encourage everyone to do that. So I hope I answered most of those points that you asked.
Yeah, I think you did. I think it's an interesting graduated approach that you took there, and true to form what you had mentioned in your presentation. It's about sort of, the Nelson Mandela approach to cybersecurity, so to speak, which is changing the behaviors, gradually changing the behaviors, and that's what you did over a period of weeks. I'm sure there were some angry users at some points, but such is life. You have to deal with it, especially when you are trying to prevent impersonation of the WHO. Speaking of subdomains and things of that nature, our next question actually has to deal with the IT departments. So, you also briefly touched upon this, and this is something I dealt with quite a lot in my life as well. And the question is, how can organizations address the potential conflict of interest between information technology and information security when InfoSec folks work within IT? So I think what the question is trying to get at is there an inherent conflict of interest between IT and InfoSec, perhaps when IT's metrics are based on things like uptime, and InfoSec departments' metrics are based on, patching, updating, and very often, in order to secure systems, you may have to take them offline. So I'll let you answer that one.
So this is the classical problem related to risk. So my approach is always bring the risk assessment, and there are degrees of risks. If the vulnerability, for example, happens externally with access to ways to attack and to exploit, so exploitation is available, then even the business owner, as part of the process, agree that the system needs to be taken offline. So this happened multiple times in WTO. So this is part of the behavior change and understanding, but the only way you can achieve that is to tie to the risk management and to make sure that it's quite clear what risk you're willing to take. And so this is one angle to your question. I see other angles. The other angles are related to the quality of the information or type of information, and the impact that this may have to the organization. So if you have very sensitive information, that is a very good argument to take systems offline. And the ability to really assess that is the important aspect, and bringing the IT security and the information security glue to the risk management and understanding of the risk from the type of information, from the impact to the organization, and teaching IT about lateral movement, because some people may believe that, oh, but this system is so inoffensive and doesn't have a lot of impact, etc. But when you look at the ability for hackers to jump and to use that system as the bridge, then when they understand that, they are with you. And again, it is all tied to the risk.
There we go. I'm back. So the cohesive tissue there between IT and information security, in your opinion, is really the concept of risk management, putting it all together. And I would guess, as well, properly documenting what that risk is, writing it down, figuring out what that residual risk is, and then how do you mitigate that residual risk, which requires more collaboration between information technology and information security people to begin with. Great questions still coming in here, Flavio, and I'm glad we still have some time. Another question is also sort of about sort of internal issues in politics. So the question is, you mentioned people clicking your phishing link 3 times, then a one-on-one conversation happening at that point. Many times people can become defensive in the situation. How were these conversations handled to avoid that?
No, absolutely. That's sometimes even one click generates the complaint from the user calling me and saying that they will never click again any link because we shouldn't be testing. And over time, and talking with them to make sure that yeah, maybe it is better that they don't click, because if they don't look at, they are exposing the organization to hackers. So so that trying to dialogue with the users in a way that they really understand the situation. But again, after the 3 clicks, that personal conversation starts with, how can you help us to change definitely something is wrong on the language. So how can we adapt our language to show to you how to catch those links that you're clicking 3 times? So it's when you start that conversation asking for their help, it breaks the ice and creates the collaboration. And again, this is part of the human OS. We need to really understand that technology is complicated, and we need to acknowledge that people are doing their best, doing their work, and we cannot require that they are technical people. They need to use things, but they need to understand why they should see and what they should see, and somehow training, online training, is not doing all the favor to really understand all the aspects. So we are getting the feedback from them, and that 101 sometimes will do the trick. And the aspect of being tested regularly every year and more than once is another way to do. It's like gymnastics, right? So if you run constantly, run is not really a big problem for you. If you never run and sometimes needed to run, maybe a muscle will be weak. So we need to keep doing the exercises in multiple ways in order for the user to be prepared. So this is how I think.
I can understand perfectly your analogy about needing to run more often. Yes, thank you for that. And going from the sort of the specific individuals to a question more about organizations themselves, I love this next question that we have from the audience here, which is, do you see the WHO in a prime position to push governments all over the world to develop robust, secure portals to consolidate PPE distribution, contact tracing, et cetera, that are, all of these activities that are related to the pandemic itself? So going from individual behavioral changes to organizational and governmental behavioral changes through the WHO.
A great question. WHO, we work for all member states, really. We cannot impose anything to member states. We can make recommendations and have meetings with member states to agree upon those recommendations. And one example, a good example, and I can see here on the chat, contact tracing. For example, this is a great example. WHO developed a contact tracing software, and we shared that capability with member states to really run those contact tracing to enable a much better way to really, especially during the time of Ebola, to really understand all the connections, because through contact tracing, you're able to really manage the distribution of the virus, containment, and all the work that doctors, epidemiologists will perform. So we already do this type of activity, but we have limited resources, right? So we give guidelines, we give specific cybersecurity guidelines multiple times, and we do our best to create those frameworks so each member state can implement at their own capabilities, because each member state may have different limitations, and sometimes even WHO is the hosting of those systems for specific member states.
Speaking of which, and sort of going along the same lines about collaboration and influence, another question is, do you have, and by you, I think, we mean the WHO and perhaps, the office of the CISO within the WHO, do you have important partnerships with other international organizations? I imagine organizations like Doctors Without Borders or UNICEF. I mean, the United Nations, obviously, you've got a unique relationship with them being part of the United Nations. But all of these other IGOs, these intergovernmental organizations that might be facing similar challenges, maybe not as immediate or imminent as the WHO faced in the face of this pandemic. But what's that type of collaboration between international organizations like?
All right, we have multiple groups. One group with all CISOs, it's a closed group that we share all the time. Once I receive any signal, any IOC, or they receive, we collaborate. And as part of the UN system, so there's another unit called UNICC that developed a system that we share all the threat intelligence. So we do a lot of that across the UN, and we have smaller groups that are more regional, because there are some attacks that are quite restricted or limited to countries. And we have this type of subgroups. I'm a member of the subgroup in Geneva, because CISOs are next to each other and we get together all the time. So I see UNICEF, I see other organizations, and within the UN we have a complete collaboration. WFP, recently we had integration of systems and using federation of identity in order to enable a dashboard for supply chain for the COVID situation. So we normally do that. And with other organizations that are not UN, we have a slightly different type of collaboration, but we still do. And with partners. So we have multiple other partners that we provide systems to integrate and to being able to mobilize doctors in case of need. So I think from the collaboration point of view, we are doing that for a long time, and this is done well.
It sounds like, there's a lot of efficiencies that are built into the process itself. I mean, and across agencies, do you share things even like, your third-party risk assessments for potential vendors, things like that? I mean, that there's so much time and effort that organizations put into third-party risk assessments. If information like that could be shared on a timely basis amongst international organizations, you would think that resources could be rededicated to something like solving a world health crisis. So that would be something that you would share.
Yeah, absolutely. We do that, and even a simple example of procurement. So within the UN, if we have an RFP, doesn't matter what agency, and if that RFP is done in the last 2 years, we can just piggyback on that RFP and avoid all the time spent in the process, because we follow the UN RFP process, and we can save a lot of time. I'm just giving one example, but on the other example, when we have situations that we get intel, and that intel is shared across the UN as well.
Flavio, to wrap this up, and first of all, thank you so much for your time and sharing this insight into how the World Health Organization has been operating, and your role there, and how things have changed. This is just so incredibly fascinating. The sort of conclusory recapitulation, usual question here is: you've got an audience of the Hackers on Planet Earth community here, glued to the screen. What advice, what requests do you have from this particular community? How can we help? What do you need? Now's your chance.
Thank you. By the way, thank you for the opportunity. I think that is a fascinating opportunity, unique opportunity. And what I can tell you is make sure that if you find anything in any threat or any vulnerability related to the WHO, WHO.int, please share it with me. Share it with agiof@who.int. Very important to get your help. Meaningful information, detailed information. I'm active on LinkedIn, and if you wanted to connect there, more than welcome. And as I mentioned in the presentation, let's together put pressure on the community, the entire community, to enable DMARC. DMARC must be mandatory. And if we all speak that, and if we all put the pressure in Congress, pressure in the internet community, and make sure that DMARC is mandatory, we can alleviate a lot of problems. So those are the two requests that I have. That I think will be quite important. And I'm really thank you for the opportunity, Alex. Hope 2020. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And if you have any questions, let me know. And if you have any indication of vulnerabilities or attacks, share it with us as quickly as possible.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Flavio. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.